Ion Fury gives us a lot to unpack. Not necessarily in its gameplay, but more so in its concept. This is a game made specifically to target nostalgic 90s gamers. But that begs the question, is Ion Fury just a mediocre throwback to the 90s? Or is it a quality game? How good is Ion Fury? Hey everyone, Jarek the Gaming Dragon here. If you're already subscribed and you haven't clicked that bell, be sure to do that, otherwise YouTube won't tell you that I posted anything. If you haven't subscribed, well, watch this video and maybe consider subscribing if you like it. You might know Ion Fury under a different name. It was originally called Ion Maiden, but they got sued by Iron Maiden, so they changed their name to Ion Fury. Most people are outraged about this, but to be honest, when I hear the name Ion Maiden, I immediately think of Iron Maiden, so I kind of understand it. I wasn't really very upset. Ion Fury is also a cool name, so whatever, let's run with it. Before we talk about the game, we're going to have to talk about the engine it runs on. As you can probably tell, this is an authentic 90s engine. It's the Build engine. This is the same engine that ran Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and Blood. This engine has quite a bit of a legacy, but it's been 20 years since we've seen a game come out on this engine. The last I could find came out in 1999, which even at that time was showing its age. I mean, Half-Life 1 came out a year before that, let alone things like Unreal pushing games forward. Logically, the next step for shooters was to push things into full 3D, and the market never really looked back. Until recently when we've been seeing a ton of games like this from indie developers. But this is the first time a bigger developer has really done this. Yeah, 3D Realms made this game. And it's not just a quick 3-hour play throwaway style game, this is a full game. It will last you around 7 hours. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that someone made a full Build engine game in 2019. Now, I'm in a little bit of a weird state when it comes to Ion Fury. I was born in 91, so I'm very much so a 90s kid. I had older brothers that grew up in the 80s, and I just kind of have always had a heavy dose of video games growing up. As a kid, I was constantly playing shooters like Doom, like Blood, like Shadow Warrior, even Chex Quest, which is getting a remake. Mind blown again. But even though I constantly played these games, it wasn't really until around Half-Life 1 that I fully got invested in first-person shooters. See, shooters like this back in the 90s never quite grabbed me, but Half-Life 1 really sucked me in, and I was kind of hooked ever since. When I think of nostalgic shooters for me, I think of games like Timesplitters 2. I think of going over to my friend's house after middle school or high school and playing Halo 2 or Super Smash Bros. Melee. For me, that time is the most nostalgic. It's certainly not because 90s shooters were before my time, and I really wanted to clarify that. I think that makes me sort of a perfect person to look at this without having any sort of outside bias. It doesn't play on my nostalgia very hard, but also I've played these before, so I do have experience with them. Okay, enough chit chat, let's actually talk about the game. First things first, the game runs flawlessly. You should have absolutely no problem playing this game. It has tons of features, all the options you could want, and yes, it even has an FOV slider. Although default FOV is 90, big shocker, so most of you probably won't change it off that. The game never crashed on me and ran flawlessly, but I did have one problem. Screen tearing is really bad in this game. Turning on vertical sync in-game does fix this, but it adds weird lag to the mouse, so I don't want to do this. Turning on VSync in my NVIDIA control panel didn't actually seem to do anything. So you should have no problem playing this game, but do note that you might have some really bad screen tearing. Graphically though, Ion Fury is a very good-looking Build engine game. And that's important to clarify. Build engine game. Obviously this is an outdated engine looking for a specific art style, and they nailed it. What's more impressive is the amount of detail in each level. There's neon signs everywhere fulfilling this sort of futuristic sci-fi environment. Every shop is full of stuff that you could potentially buy. It's a full realized world with a great art direction. It's very easy to see that there was a ton of love and care put into polishing up this game. This game looks great graphically for a Build engine game, but how about the story? Well, aside from the occasional one-liner coming out of the protagonist and antagonist, there's not really a whole lot going on here. There is a readme that will tell you what's going on, and it's obvious you do need to take care of this antagonist, but you don't really know much more. As if you can't tell I didn't read the readme, but you know what, this is par for the course for 90s shooters, and I'm not complaining about this. I actually miss the time where shooters were based around, hey, you have a gun, there's an enemy, shoot the enemy. I feel like games nowadays are so caught up in exposition and telling a story that it becomes difficult to actually play the game. After a while, the game becomes an interactive cutscene, and at that point I'd rather just go watch a movie. Gameplay has always been the main focus of first-person shooters, and aside from a few exceptions, Honestly, that's how it should be. Your gun is your character, the enemies are the target, and your interaction with the environment dictates how fun that game is going to be. It is very difficult to make a first-person shooter with a great story and bad gameplay but be considered a great game. Even the shooters I played for the story still had at least passable gameplay, for example Spec Ops The Line and The Darkness 1. And some of my favorite games seem to gloss over the story at best. I mean, Doom 2016 is a great example. I'm not saying there isn't a space in the market for a story-based first-person shooter, those can still exist, but I feel like the market has shifted over to those almost entirely, and it's very difficult to find an old-fashioned shooter about, well, the shooter. This is one of those games that scratches that itch, and it scratches it very well if you want an old-fashioned 90s first-person shooter. You have a wide array of weapons to use and a wide array of different enemies to shoot. None of your weapons get too out there, but they are far more interesting than your generic AK or M16. For example, your shotgun is basically a pump-action M32, and the split function loads in your regular explosive rounds. You can dual-wield Chris Vector-style looking submachine guns that fire incendiary rounds that light everything on fire in the most comically overdone way, which is awesome. Your baton is electrically charged, and you can also smack generators to put electricity back into them. I'm not quite sure how that works, but why not? But my favorite is probably your starting pistol. The pistol that you spawn with at the very beginning of the game, which is a rare sight to see the very first gun you get still be usable till the end of the game. This pistol is a tri-barreled revolver with a huge cylinder. Its split function basically acts like an aimbot that will lock onto targets' heads. This is awesome. It's especially useful for those more annoying enemies that won't sit still, like the tiny bugs or any flying enemies. There's plenty of other weapons to talk about, but I think I'll let you find those on your own. I mentioned those small bugs, and those are really my only complaint about the game. Enemies like this are never fun to shoot, and they spawn too many of them. They just kind of get annoying. You never get overwhelmed with them, but they're thrown into the regular enemies, and I'd just be fine if these didn't exist. On the flip side, the map design is something I can give a lot of praise to. Map design in first-person shooters has seemingly devolved over the years. They become increasingly more and more linear, and you can do this right, like say with Half-Life 1, or you can do it wrong, like say all these modern military shooters that came out in the late 2000s. So it's really refreshing to go back and play a game that makes map designs a lot more vertical, but also not a maze. This game is not a case of Doom 1 or Doom 2. You will not be running around a literal maze trying to find a keycard. Keycards do exist, but the game does a very good job pushing you in the correct direction. You might occasionally miss an obvious cue and kind of wander around for a bit, but once you find that card, you're set in the right direction again. It's genuinely interesting to look at how the map evolved over time once you reach the end of a level. It really does feel like map design has gotten lazy over the years. Now, I know the reason for that is so that people won't get lost, so you don't lose casual players, but you can design intricate maps while also leading players the correct direction and not feel like you're holding their hand. This was the standard back in the late 90s, but it's really hard to find nowadays. You can almost see map design devolve even through franchises that are considered some of the best of all time. I'll mention Half-Life again. In Half-Life 1, to get rid of this tentacle which served as a roadblock, you have to go through numerous levels and turn on numerous switches. This is a big open area with some pretty good map design. Meanwhile, in Half-Life 2, nothing like this exists. It is just invisible hallway corridors from start to end. It may get rid of the risk of players getting lost, but it also gets rid of the risk of experimenting as you're playing the game. This is something that you will never have to worry about in Ion Fury. So what's my final verdict of this game? Well, I don't think it matters. This game is a heavily subjective-based game, and it really hinges on how nostalgic you feel for 90s-based shooters. If you're someone that isn't really nostalgic towards something like Duke Nukem 3D, you're probably going to see this as a good time waster at best or really boring at worst. And you know what? That's fine. You don't have to appreciate it in that way. I love what Ion Fury has done. It advertised to a very specific market. It's doing something that we've not really seen in the AAA publisher space in a long time. The gaming market always seems to want to make every single game be the next Halo, the next Call of Duty, the next Fortnite, and if it doesn't reach that goal, it's considered a failure even if it sells millions. There is nothing wrong with having a game like Ion Fury. There is nothing wrong with a game that isn't made for everyone. It's made for a specific style of gamer. This is a good thing that we need more of. It's almost frustrating to look at the views of this game because they're almost always going to be either a 6 or an 8.5, 9 or higher. How you view this game is so subjective that putting a number on it just doesn't really make any sense. I know that in the end of the day reviewers have to put a number on something, but I feel like that just misses the whole point of this game. If this game came out back in 1996, we would be talking about it as one of the best shooters of all time. It's an incredibly polished game, and if you like this style of stuff, you owe it to yourself to play this. If you're not nostalgically attached to 90s based shooters, I can't necessarily say I would completely recommend it, but at least you can try it and see if it's your thing. At worst, you'll have a decent time waster or maybe find it boring, but you're certainly not going to have a bad time. It's a great game for what it aims to be, and I wish more publishers would get behind games like this. At only 25 bucks, go check it out. That about sums up my analysis of Ion Fury. Thanks all of you that watched me stream this game over to my Twitch. If you want to come hang out in the future, my Twitch is twitch.tv/Jerrick4GamingDragon. If you subscribe on Twitch, which is different than following, you'll be able to see my videos one day ahead of time. My patrons will also see my videos one day ahead of time. If you want to check out my Patreon, you can click the link down in the bottom right. If you want to see my other videos, you can click them on the screen here. Thank all of you for watching, and I will see you next time.